Hello, we are recording. All right, now we're going live on the Facebook, live on the Facebook. Is there a drumming noise in the background that you can hear on my end?
No.
Okay, everything sounds good.
A heavy creak go by because like the floor real creaky right here.
I tell everybody I'm recording. Keep that dog in the kennel.
Like
she will run and make noises.
Oh my gosh! Like I've recorded like another online thing before and just heard people walking above, and I'm like,
that happened last time I did a podcast to somebody. They recorded at somebody's house, and it was just like somebody was like, it's like you could tell they were just like standing in place.
Yep. And you're just like, okay, you're here. There you go.
Right. Okay. Share on my timeline. It is going live. In 1 second, preparing.
Ooh, it's blue. Let's refresh and see. Oh, it's a story.
I don't know why they need all this extra stuff.
I don't look too blown out in the light in this.
Nope.
Okay, cool. I just feel like my teeth are like just all white.
That's a good thing to have.
You can't tell their teeth is just like white opening. So.
Nope, it looks good. All right, we are now live on Facebook. We are streaming, and all right, so I'm just gonna turn that off. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to Quick to Politic. I am your host, Ernestine Lyons, and this is a social commentary show that is focusing on contemporary issues and politics, of course. So today with us, our guest is Herasanna Richards, and so pronounce your name for us, like, because I feel like I took a while.
Herasanna, yeah.
So Herasanna Richards, and I'm so excited to have you here, and we are going to be talking about pretty much just the gig economy, the future of what it means to be a working millennial and workforce development. Local governments, and we're going to also be talking about criminal justice reform and just all of these factors. And with us being Black women, we also want to share our perspective on just working in the space of government and politics and economic development. But first, I do want to share a little bit about. So Herasanna Richards is an experienced coalition builder. And you're a policy professional, communicator, activist, and you have over 8 years of experience in community organizing, public affairs, and running all the campaigns throughout Michigan everywhere. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself from your perspective, and what makes you tick, and what is your essence and your why?
Yeah, so thank you, Ernestine. First off, I'm so excited to be on Quick to Politic. I have been a fan for some time, and I am always in salute of Black women sharing information and knowledge, especially on policy. So yeah, a little bit about me. My name is Herasanna Richards. I live in Detroit, Michigan. Professionally, I work with the Michigan Municipal League. I'm a legislative associate where I lobby on behalf of Michigan governments and support them in areas of energy, environment, public safety, elections, and along with my colleagues, we cover a very wide scope of everything involved in local government. Our goal is to make sure that, we love where you live and making sure that our communities in Michigan are vibrant, amazing, especially making sure that, our members like Ernestine have the resources they need to lead and provide awesome outcomes for their residents. But in addition to that, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and came to Michigan by way of Michigan State, originally as a music major. Funny enough. And then I'd always loved policy and politics. And so at the end of my first year of college, instead of practicing 7 to 8 hours a day, I wanted to do more stuff in my community. I wanted to meet more people and share those experiences. And so that catapulted me into political science, a separate major in communications. And during my time at Michigan State, I also organized around sexual assault reform and advocacy. As a survivor myself during my experience at Michigan State, really just reinforced to me how important, how critical our educational experiences are, how they shape us, and how we should hold our institutions accountable, making sure that they provide opportunities for us to be safe and to flourish. And so my advocacy really started in that. And from there, I recognized that our systems are the way they are because of the people that we elect. And that got me into doing more governmental work. And so early in my career, I started out consulting on local government campaigns all the way up to the federal level congressional campaigns. And that gave me a really great understanding of, why the right people running for office matters, why having informed and engaged elections are critical. The things that we maybe take for granted within our systems, and recognizing that maybe elections may be only important to us every 4 years in November. That's something we need to dive into. Elections are important all the time, and all politics is local. And, so from there, I've had a lot of opportunities to work with different associations that are very rooted in doing community and local work, especially in coalition building as well, which is kind of my sweet spot. So I've done work with the Detroit Restaurant and Lodging Association as their executive director. My work currently at Michigan Municipal League, and then also a criminal justice frame. I was the outreach coordinator for Safe and Just Michigan, where we worked primarily with crime survivors and returning citizens, and helping them get engaged with policy initiatives and outcomes that would sustain their needs, and working from the voices that were directly impacted by those outcomes. And so I've had a really amazing and diverse career over a very short time, but it's been incredibly fulfilling to have so many different angles of working with community, working with different folks across the board. And then personally for me, I have podcast myself called Take Back Politics, where we focus on, politics from the millennial perspective. And then also I do a lot of work specifically with the 14th Congressional District, but with congressional youth councils across the state, getting more young people involved in congressional parties, whether it's volunteering or just the structure. And so that we make sure our young people have an understanding of the government from the ground up, and they have every sort of way and avenue to be engaged.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. And for somebody so young, so accomplished, and like #Black Excellence. So, but yeah, I'm really, really in awe of you. And I remember when I first met you, we just kind of sat down, and I really, it was a good vibe, and I felt like I was talking to a kindred spirit, and, you're out there doing excellent, amazing things. And so you're an inspiration.
Oh my gosh. I can say the same thing about you, because I'm going to say I was an Ernie fan before, we met in person. I noticed you online and your work with Lynn Global, because for me, education is incredibly important. My dad is an educator. I grew up in college classrooms, and so my entire life has been really based around learning and exploration and diversity. And I think your work you do with languages is so important, because language, especially for us as Americans who gets, ridiculously teased for only knowing primarily one language, that can be our greatest barrier to expanding.
Right. When you got the world out there, full of polyglots and, multilingual people. And I think that also fosters a different understanding, because then we become custodians of each other's shared international experiences, so to speak, so that, we do feel like we're all a part of, one world, and, that we all need to take care of each other. So,
yes. Been a fan.
Right. So I do want to kind of just like dive into some of the questions here about, so your work in research has been focused on workforce development, and, so millennials typically will be likely to have 15 jobs over their career, compared to about 5 for baby boomers and other generations. So how does demand for, low wage, high skill, low wage positions explain kind of like the future of, and it kind of adjusts for the future of millennials, especially considering that, we have to embrace, the digital future, which is, it's all about how businesses will essentially have to operate digitally in the future. Everything's going to be online, and we're all going to be like a global commerce community where everything is interconnected via, the web. So I just want to kind of delve into that question, and like, what does it mean for the future of millennials?
Yeah, no, I think this is really important because it's not a new topic. We've been talking about how we can, strengthen our working class, especially when we notice that those jobs have become more demanding with how fast paced our society has become, and also with a lot of the advances that have come with other jobs. And so we have to start thinking about, what are the barriers of keeping people in jobs where they can have dignity, first of all, if that they can have all of the resources they need to meet their personal needs for how much work that they're putting in, because it should be fair. And also, what are their opportunities and pathways to move on? Because a big thing that we hear about all across the board, and I'm thinking directly to my experience at the Restaurant and Lodging Association, but like people want to move up and oftentimes they lack the credentials to do so. And when we start unpacking that, we start recognizing that there's barriers that are in the way of keeping people to getting to what they need to do. Thinking locally, with what we're doing here in Michigan, what's our biggest barrier to getting jobs, getting to education? The first one we think of is transportation. We think about transit. How am I going to get to school? How am I going to get to work? How am I going to get to this class? And so start not even thinking about what are our barriers and how we get there, but like then how can we move them forward and make them stack on top of each other? And so a concept we used to talk about when I was with the DRLA was stackable credentials within the hospitality industry. And so seeing if there are ways where we can credentialize key components in our industry that are very clear and also translatable. So for example, looking at basic skills, like being able to show up on time, coming well dressed and prepared, neatly groomed. You have team working skills, team building skills. You can stack that up and translate it all to accounting and management, understanding operations, understanding how to stock a restaurant, learning how to do packaging, work with vendors, so on, so after. And so when we take those core skills and when we find ways to credentialize them in ways that are translatable and then provide manners in which we can have recognized credentials, we can now transition to a way where there's a way that people can get more accessibly their education, the resources that they need to move on in a way that's recognized across the board. Because I think we need to move away from just having, your bachelor's, your master's, and your PhD as your only credentials as having meaningful ways to get into jobs. We have folks coming from all different backgrounds. Some folks do very well in a traditional classroom setting. Others prefer to be online. Some folks don't do well in college settings, but are incredible when they're in an internship, when they're learning hands-on. And so even paramounting beyond that, how can we have stackable credentials, but also how can we have fluid learning environments that meet the needs that we have right now? And so COVID-19 has really shown us that we have to be flexible. And I think even more importantly, that we can. We watched predominantly almost all of our workforce transition to online. And so now we see how we have to prioritize broadband access, but also recognizing that when we can see ourselves as a fully functional society, all up and down our age bracket of having access to internet, perhaps we should, because of our access to internet, perhaps we should expand our resources, our critical resources, and our critical expectations, if you will, of success into society into ways that are achievable in that manner, and expanding that onto credentials as well.
Awesome. You talked about stackable credentials, and I know when I first reached out to you, I kind of wanted to get your take on what was going to be the future of the gig economy. And I think this is something that we're seeing. I talked about how millennials, we have 15 jobs, or we'll change jobs and we won't really stick with something. But I think this the way that it's quoted, it's almost like, oh, we're just leaving, we're just moving. And it's more, certain things are not going to be as reliable the way that it was for our parents' generation, where you had all these great benefits and you had all of this, just a great work, a great company to work for. And companies aren't really doing, what they used to for employees. And so I do find that, kind of having that extra skill person, step in and start making immediately $30,000 or something, that's really not going to get it, when a millennial is typically going to come with a lot more student debt. So, I just kind of wanted to kind of explain what the gig economy is and why, in addition to this job that, only offers $37,000, but it also gives you dental and vision, you may need to supplement the income through a gig. So that is something like, if you're a graphic designer, you moonlight and you work with Fiverr and you offer your services through there, or you drive Uber or Lyft, or, you host Airbnb, or you do Grubhub. And so it's that other economy of, you know, gigs that you do that kind of give you what would have been, you know, a baby boomer's kind of like nice, cushy $50,000 that they're making after, you know, college, to be able to, one, get rid of the debt, and then two, to just live. So I just kind of wanted to, you know, what is, you know, your take on why we need to do this? And then, you know, is this going to be a good thing? And is this going to be the future of, you know, just how we interact?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100%. I think it's something that needs to be embraced. And you touched on it a little bit in your comments, but I would say that millennials, young people in our generation, our time, tend to be more opportunity minded rather than career minded, if that makes sense. You know, I think our prior generations have said, you know, I'm going to go to school to be a doctor. I'm going to be a professional accountant. I'm going to be a professional in this field, in this thing. And that's admirable and that's cool. And I think there's also lots of people who still are like that.
Right.
And
but if there's other people like, I have to figure this out more, you know, okay, let me try this thing. And then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we see people now, and I think it's a transition of our society collectively, you know, of course, the development of the middle class, you know, the accessibility of college education, a tremendous rise in first generation college students that have pushed people out of the certain barriers of jobs in which they had to expect and do, into now, okay, let me think of this broader opportunity, and compound that with how fast our technology and our society is developing. The things that you can do have transformed tremendously. You know, I remember being in 6th grade and playing around, tinkering on a computer, not knowing how understanding internal computer framework would help me tremendously in one of the first jobs of my career. And just, you know, for that, I was a way that was in an indirect way prepared for that. But then we really do see our, you know, an influence on technology, on learning social media, on learning just, we now even see media and PR included as a core component for folks, not just folks who are in communication and media, but because everybody at some point in their life may be doing something like what you and I are doing in an interview format, you know, talking and presenting. And so we have seen like that transition in our education and what we're learning. And I think that's opened up more broadly to people thinking of what can they do. And, you know, I know for me, you know, you mentioned the statistic of 15 jobs throughout their career, and, you know, boomers maybe maxing out at 5. I'm on job 4 right now. But every single job for me has compounded into a new and a different opportunity. But I also know, at least for a couple of my jobs I had, they didn't exist before I got there. And so I do think another piece of that is that when we have young people who are very engaged in opportunity and excited to that, we find them more seeking in that boldness to jump into opportunities that are created for them. And I dial back and say this, you know, traditionally, you know, our elders, our mentors in our life may caution us against taking a job that may not exist, or joining a startup that may have no money, or even, God forbid, going out on our own and starting a nonprofit.
Right. That's a risk.
We are a generation, I wouldn't say of dreamers, but very much doers. Very much of like, you know what, if I don't do it, nobody will. If nobody creates this show, if nobody creates this nonprofit, if nobody runs for this office other than the person who's been a 16-term incumbent, then nobody else will but me. And I think that boldness just comes with the energy, and I think also with a lot of the experiences we have observed in the leadership of our elders of our past, and we should acknowledge that as well. But I do think it is hard too. And I say this as a woman, as a Black woman, as just myself, I know to get into gig economy and to do that has also been very hard, because a lot of us are also pushed into that catalyst in one of two ways, in the sense of we have to do it because we have a need or a financial obligation that we have to address, and we're going to go for it and do it. Or you find yourself in a position where you're like, well, I'm locked in a box. I don't have an opportunity to go and grow anymore. So I'm going to do this, and so somebody can notice me.
Right.
And that's a scary thing to do.
It's almost like that, you know, the way that we do things is it doesn't exist, so I'm going to create it. And so, and that is the thing that typically, like, for some reason, that standing out and doing something unique and different. You know, I've heard so many stories of millennials who, you know, have done something like this, where it's like, oh, you were doing your own thing that was so innovative. So-and-so company, you know, really came and they were just like, join us. We want to see more of this. So I think it's really telling that, like, we kind of are that bold generation who are looking to set the tone for, you know, what it means to be a part of a workforce, and reimagining even like, you know, remote work. And, you know, this is something that we've had capabilities to do even before COVID-19, but now it's more, you know, there was always a conversation on remote work and, you know, what does that mean? It's like, as long as you're productive, you can work anywhere. And I know that there are even, it was something called Remote Year that a friend of mine said, you know, you're traveling around the world, and but you still have a job that's back in the United States, it's based in some company, but you live in like 7 different places around the world, because it's really more about your productivity. And if you can measure that productivity and you can really like show that like, hey, I'm still dedicated, I'm doing this, I'm rocking and rolling, it doesn't matter that I'm on the beach with my laptop. It's the fact that I can do it and I can get it done. And, you know, you kind of did talk about like technology being that thing that, you know, it's prepared us for this world where it's digital and everywhere, and, you know, it's here and it's there. And, you know, so we don't have to be chained to our desks. And I think that's the thing about COVID-19 that kind of maybe even start the series, and it's been the underlying, you know, sort of topic of conversation that's remained the same no matter who I talk to. It's COVID has shown us what we really are capable of. And it's also shown, you know, what we still need to work on, what needs improvement. But kind of, you know, preparing for, you know, the future of technology and kind of being exposed to that, you know, I think we're in a similar age group bracket, but you're maybe a little younger. But I just know that in school, we were always prepared, and we were, you know, being exposed to these things. And, you know, so you talked about Brenda Lawrence and, you know, the commitment to broadband technology and to bridging the digital divide for the 14th district and everything. Now, the World Economic Forum has also set like a very ambitious goal to, quote, leave no person behind and ensure high quality internet access for all. How important is it to plan for, you know, this digital future with policy and with preparation for on the part of like people who are in lawmaking, or people who are, you know, running nonprofits, or people who are running corporations? Even corporate social responsibility has kind of, I've noticed a lot of companies are stepping up forward and clicking loans, and, you know, making sure that, you know, kids have access to internet, and, you know, making sure that that digital divide is bridged. So how can policy really push the needle on that particular conversation?
Yeah, that's an amazing point, Ernestine. Something that we, you know, at the League have talked about, you know, the 14th Youth Advisory Council has talked about, you know, almost everyone who I know who's lived in one location of the city and moved to another and tried to get internet access and compared how drastic it can be, whether it's across the city or Michigan, you know, has talked about that. And I think in this moment too, we've shown the greatest capabilities that are possible with internet, which is one, it allows us to work at home, spend more time with our families, have a little bit more self-care and management, and also allow us to work a lot more effectively. It's removed barriers. We saw that Governor Whitmer allowed for executive orders for local governments to meet remotely. And so that removed a lot of barriers that we've heard in the past about local government meetings being at a time it's difficult for people to attend, and there's no childcare, and a barrier to people to participate. And our communities saw more people participating in local meetings when they were digital than they ever did before. And then we can go on a whole other tangent about like how local engagement and elections and, you know, government process is so important and how we should be making that accessible, but I'll digress before I dive in. But I mean, we've seen how it can work to our benefit, but we've also seen, you know, circumstances in which, you know, we try to do distance learning and there's severe barriers for people who are already marginalized and impoverished that they can't get above. And we're really, you know, our access to education is not equitable. And it's very clear now. And it's disappointing to see, you know, our federal government and leaders at the federal level support or advocate for distance learning and making it more difficult for people who are more distant from us to learn in our country and to learn in our circumstances altogether. But especially when it comes to affordability and access, and I think more importantly, infrastructure, you know, that's something that our local communities, our local leaders, especially our state legislature, can be incredibly supportive in. And then when we look at accessibility, you know, what what does municipal broadband look like? What could it look like in Michigan? What if a city like Harper Woods could, recognize that if there was, not the best internet service or internet needs that they could provide, they could freely provide them without having to jump through hoop after hoop through different public providers and making sure that they provide exactly what they provide, which may limit the value altogether. Why couldn't it just be a process that they put in place? Because what we're realizing is that if internet is something that we're relying on just the same as, clean water, just as much as just safety in our communities, then we should prioritize it as such and make it accessible. And when the infrastructure is not in place, let's make sure we're making the investment to put the money towards that so we can make it, a collective joint resource. And like I said earlier, investment in infrastructure, whether it's our roads, our bridges, altogether has not been something our state has done very well. And so I think that COVID altogether has showed us what resiliency can look like, the benefits of preparedness and the benefits of investing where we need to so that everybody across the board is taken care of. So we're not then sending out stimulus checks, because stimulus checks are good, but wouldn't it be great if our communities were whole to begin with?
Right. And this is something that I feel like people always point out that European nations do a really good job, especially, Western European nations do a really good job of providing for the people but they pay into, higher taxes so that everybody can have a share of, spending time at public parks, and those public parks are kept up, spending time at museums and libraries and places to just gather and learn. So I think, in some ways we've kind of lost that sense of collectiveness and that unity that you get, and that kind of beauty of a community that does come together and we invest in each other's future. Whether you have kids or you invest in the school, whether you go to the library, you still invest in the library. Mm-hmm. And, so you are invested, as a community member in the best possible outcome. And, I think that's kind of a revolutionary idea right now, but I feel like in 10 years, kind of making sure that municipalities are providing, this broadband and internet access, and, just doing that as a service the same way you would water and, you would trash collection. So I think that's something that you may have to, we have to, as the next generation of leaders, have to start thinking about critically and saying that this is probably the best move.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, even going back to what you said, it's not just making sure our municipalities and our cities do certain things, that they have the ability to do so. So another topic that we could dive into, we can or we cannot, is preemption. And the concept of that is essentially that you may have rules at a local level of government that your local government may put in place, but your state and your federal government has the ability to say, you can't put rules in place in relation to this, or you cannot put rules that, for example, City of Harper Woods says all dogs must be on a leash. The state of Michigan can make a rule that says no city can regulate dogs on leashes. Your rule is then null and void. Wow. And so when we go to, for example, municipal broadband, it's the state legislature that decides, hey, these are the steps, hoops, however you want to look at it, that are in place before a municipality can proceed with, starting their own broadband service. Another topic, residency requirements for police officers, for example. There is a state level preemption that does not allow local governments to have residency requirements for officers. And so there's tons of those for every single topic across the board. But I think even going forward, looking at how our local communities have been incredibly resilient towards COVID, I think how communities, both on the government side, even and going over to our nonprofits and our businesses, like you mentioned, Ernestine, they're all starting to step up, and they're all starting to really engage in either mutual aid or public-private partnerships to make sure that we're sustainable and that we have all the resources that are capable of moving forward. And I think that in this whole event is showing us too that our local communities are pretty smart, and they know what they need, and they know what they need to do. And so perhaps, we do have to broadly change our way of thinking and saying, hey, are there rules in place? Are there policies at the state or at the federal level that keep local communities from making decisions they need, keep local leaders from responding directly to what needs are important in their communities, whether it's broadband or different infrastructure or, whatever it is. And so making sure that we collectively had the resources and also the autonomy to make those decisions as well, because we can see, local communities right there can see how much of a barrier, for example, transportation is, and also broadband as well. And when we're unable to be accountable to those systems, when you don't have, reliable transportation, into your downtown epicenter where your schools are, your jobs are, and everything. And you also don't have the infrastructure in place to access technology. How many ways are you barred from opportunities where you can't get to your education readily? You can't get to your schooling readily. You can't get to your occupation readily. You can't enjoy, the recreational fun dynamics of your community easily. And like all of those have components into quality of life.
Right. And then when you do get to it, because there's so many barriers, once you're there, what is the experience really like? Are you really enjoying yourself, or are you on edge, or are you, just in a whole different mind frame? And so as opposed to someone who does maybe have it's easier and there aren't as many barriers. So it really, and I think, that equity kind of, it kind of brings me to another point that you made about, residency of officers, and that leads to kind of the discussion about community policing. And I, for example, live in a small town where I do feel that our police are very invested in the community, and they play basketball with the kids on the court, and they get to know each other because it's just such a small place. So it kind of just brings the question of equity and justice. And so in the light of some of these movements, how can we continue to push the needle forward in terms of like equity with racial justice and criminal justice reform specifically, kind of certain perspectives on how we can really get towards, one, things like making sure that communities are being represented by their people, and they're also people understand each other so that there aren't any miscommunications, and, kind of moving towards anti-racism with regard to policy, and, kind of being there for each other and understanding how each other, how we all operate. So, how can we really push policy towards, adopting these kind of stances? And, there are a lot of discussions out there about defunding the police, and it's like, but should the discussion really be more about community policing and, just shared interest in, just a common public safety kind of understanding of each other?
Yeah, no, I mean, all of that, Ernestine, because I mean, especially that last part when you talk to, I think it ties in all together. It's just like, how do we explain the moment and the movement that we're in right now? And, as someone in local government, I'm sure too, of just, you hear narrative defund the police, you see the movement that's happening in real time, you have your direct experience as a Black woman, and they're all very different, but they're all incredibly congruent and consistent at the same time. And I think that's what makes this dialogue so hard, because collectively, when we've had conversations about racism, we don't do them very well. We try to very much, minimize those conversations, similar to like religion or politics or whatever makes us socially uncomfortable. We don't talk about them. And so these dialogues that we're having right now are incredibly raw. They're very deep. And I think they're filled and fueled initially by a lot of stereotypes and misunderstanding. And we see that when folks shut down about defunding the police and what that means, because it's an incredibly provocative term. It stirs you, it jumps you. Perhaps you may clutch your pearls, or perhaps you may nod in agreement and say, you know what, you're right. And I think, diving into my organizer hat and all of that, be like, that's what works. If we were saying reform the police for the past 50 years, and we were, things would have changed. And so I think that's an important piece to narrative and messaging. But I mean, it does give us the, responsibility to unpack that. And when we unpack that, we start to recognize that when we talk about defund the police, it's truly instead divestment, and more so the conversation of giving resources to where they're needed and to the individuals who need them most, and appropriately equipping and training our police, and likewise, equipping our forces and public safety units with the team and the staff and all the things that are necessary for them to do their job in an equitable way, in a way that's responsive and constructive, and supports people and doesn't traumatize them. And so we've seen, for example, many cities across the state, with the ability to, they have brought on social workers to also help engage in different circumstances that they've been involved with, where it may not be necessary for force, but you can have somebody there to maybe just de-escalate a situation. So, for example, I've been walking down a street before and seen 5 officers arresting a mentally ill person. And so those are the kind of situations we think of, like how can that circumstance be responded to where that individual gets the care that they need, and then also has a support need. And that it goes much deeper than that, because those are very A-level examples. And the thing I think we should talk about too is that every community is different. You know, there are many communities that may interact with, engage with police violence in a very direct way to race. For some communities, it's mental health. Some communities, it's homelessness and how they respond to people who are transient and what services they provide them and where they put them. So it's all across the board. And so I don't want people to get tied up into a discussion about police brutality and equitable policing, which I think is a more inclusive term, not as direct to what I think in some circumstances it needs to be, but thinking collectively, like, what are all the engagements in public safety that may diminish someone's access to equity or may not support them in the right way? And all it is thinking about, does your community have the resources to support that entire frame of opportunities that may be presented to you? And that's hard.
Training and, making sure that, people do feel supported. And I think that you did touch on like having other avenues, like, a mental health court, or having other channels for, some sort of person, some person maybe at policing in schools, maybe that's not necessary, and having more people who can help with that. There used to be school counselors, and I noticed when I was in high school that kind of went away, and they were replaced by community, or not community, but school, the police who were, I forget the name of the police officers.
I know what you mean. They were just like, they were community officers at my school.
Right. And so in some ways, I think, getting back to, just having more funding for that sort of thing.
Yes.
And each thing has to, can have more funding allocated towards it. So I think it's kind of, it gets to the point of, how radical do you have to be in politics to get, to get people to take notice of issues that have been plaguing us for a very long time. Because in some ways, when you really think about even just like economic issues, there was a lot more equity when, more people had a share of the pie, and then things just naturally got funded, and if not, they had benevolent benefactors who would, I'm leaving this amount of money to parks and to, to fund the arts and to send kids to music school or something. And so when you kind of have a culture of, or at least a movement in America where we have a lot of this nationalism that, thinks it's, better to just, bootstraps. No, if you can't afford a museum, you don't get to have one. And, why did the museum have to come from, the taxes of everyday people? I don't go there. So I think in some ways it kind of brings it back to a discussion of using really loaded terms like defund the police. It really does bring the attention to something that for a while people were saying, police need more training. And they need more de-escalation training. They need more this. And when they were saying it in those terms, it's like it fell on deaf ears. But then to say something extremely radical, that kind of gets the attention. And so I think in some ways, looking at just the actions of people like the Squad, where you've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you've got, Rashida Tlaib, and then you got Ayanna Pressley. I feel like in some ways they kind of represent this new movement in progressives where we're extreme. And we represent extreme ideas. And I think that can be scary to people. And, as a politician, or as somebody who represents people, you want to not alienate, and you also want to be able to push people, and you want to bring a better life to people. So I don't know, it's my question to you, I guess, is how do you navigate really, really pushing for new and innovative ideas without scaring away people who are kind of scared of the radical rhetoric that really is bringing about more change?
Yeah, and that's a hard one, I mean, it's not a hard one. It's a hard endeavor, but it's not a hard one to me. I mean, I think that it's, looking altogether, we got to be able to look at what the problem is and be very direct to what the issue is. Like, if we have incredible equity barriers that are present in every facet of our lives, we need to acknowledge that. And I think, the Squad is so powerful in their, denouncement of structures that clearly don't work, because I think they are all made up of women and individuals who are very close to those systems not working, right? You know, you have former council member and Congresswoman Presley, you know, Congresswoman Tlaib was in the Michigan legislature, and she has been a powerful attorney throughout her career for equity and civil rights. And, you know, you look at these women who have been literally on the ground, you know, fighting the establishment, fighting these big powers that are part, I think, of the machine in politics that has kept, you know, the status quo for so long. And while the status quo may not work, it's comfortable and it's consistent. And, you know, when we see a lot of people who are pushing to dismantle those structures that have been in place, and, you know, for a lot of our times been in place and been the only thing that's worked, the blessings of being a young country, you know, here, that's where we are. And so now is an exciting time to be in this work, you know, to be elected, to be, you know, in politics, because like, you see this changing, you see this push that you can't ignore. And I think what's really important in this is that we have the data and the numbers and the information to prove it. You know, I bring it to a very abstract point of mine, but like, if you haven't noticed, like, you know, Michigan shorelines have been rising profusely. The waters are very high, and it's causing like incredible damage all across the shorelines of the state. And it's something that's continuously happening. And like the price tag for municipal infrastructure alone, so your utilities, your roads, your bridges being intact, you know, fixing sinkholes, you know, making sure your municipal beaches and marinas are all, you know, working together, all collectively around the state's approximately 70 million. And it's a terrifying price tag, and it's a huge issue. And we see, you know, situations like the city of Midland a few months ago, where the Tittabawassee River exceeded its volume by March. Its annual volume by March exceeded that volume. Like, that was written on the wall. And so when we have circumstances like that, we can point to the data, you know, saying that we can point to how high student loan is for Americans in this country, or how many people don't have, you know, proper housing, or how many people don't have access to clean water. It's a different argument when you're able to turn around and say, here's my data and here's my information, and I can stick to it. And I also bring that with my lived experience. And so I think that's why, for me, the squad is so powerful in their radicalness, because nothing that they're saying is a lie. Nothing about that experience that people can directly contradict. It's more so that nobody has spoken up for that.
Right. These are the facts. And I think, you know, this is why you have so much apathy amongst voters, and especially amongst, you know, young voters, where, you know, they kind of see these things where it is our lived experiences. And I think, you know, and even people say young, and it's like, I think it's also that group of people who at 45 have been like, you know what, I'm out. I don't care about politics. I hate it, because, you know, you see so many problems, mm-hmm. and, you know, so many things that are just, you know, put on display, and, you know, just the chinks in the armor and the, you know, flaws in the system, they're there for all to see.
Absolutely.
But, you know, people are just like, this is just the way that it is, as opposed to being willing to fight. And, you know, I think that's why you do get every generation that leader who comes along who is willing to inspire people to, nope, all right, I do have to change these things. And, you know, because it is my lived experience, and I don't want this to continue to be the lived experience for everyone that I either represent or that I'm around. And this can't just be the normal. So I think it is time, and we are kind of I keep saying we're on a precipice of change, and 2020 has really laid it all bare. You know, it showed that, you know, our health, there are problems with our health system. It shows that there are problems with our economic system, and things are outdated, and it's just really time for change, and we really have to embrace that, especially as we move into a digital future. Yeah. And that digital future is going to also, you know, encompass, you know, a political life. And so we really have to change with the times.
Yeah, we need to be able to ensure that our elected officials are accountable to us on this format too. You know, we talked about it earlier about engagement has been incredibly better altogether for folks on both sides, both residents and their elected officials, because they're able to access that. And like, let's keep that going into the elections. You know, we talk a lot about how most people don't vote in their primaries. And if we don't know anything now, and the only thing I can implore on this is that folks should be very engaged in their August primaries. You know, for so many different seats in Michigan, it's that primary that decides who will be your state representative. And those are the folks that are making the immediate budgetary decisions for your life in the state. And so how can we make sure that this communication, you know, not only continues, but encourages a format so we can continue talking to our elected officials, continue the communication with our folks who are working federally for us in DC. How can we hold them accountable to having these formats where they can talk and talk about the policies that they're engaging in and what they're doing? Because honestly, it wasn't until younger members of Congress started posting on Twitter and getting on Instagram and doing all the things, and everybody wanted to be on Instagram and do the Twitter and all the things. And it became a thing because people love that interaction, because AOC recognized in her Instagram stories that nobody ever took them into the room with the big seal. Nobody ever showed them what the office looked like. Nobody ever took them in the back elevator to see what this is like. And not only is that a direct experience to see what our government is doing for us, it inspires young people to say, hey, this isn't a job for somebody in their 70s.
Right.
Talk about that though. Like, why do you have to live your whole career, your whole life, and then be someone who represents us? The average age of Congress is over 60. Right. And that needs to change, because if we don't have people who don't have debt, we don't have people who don't look like us, if we don't have people who don't have those direct lived experiences in the systems that we have created.
And they don't have the same passion and fervor and that dedication where it's just like, okay, well, I can still make my life better, as opposed to I've already lived, and whether this bill passes or not, I'm still being paid.
And I'm going to show up to somebody who's holding me accountable for how I vote and how I do things, because that's really important. And it's been exciting and engaging to see that develop over the past couple of months. And maybe the government should start giving out money for free more often, who knows? But yeah, I mean, that's so key, because we've done so much strategically to make sure that government cannot be accessible to other people who they do not think are privileged enough to understand. And that's problematic.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason why, I ran for office, my first time running for office was for school board. And I'm just like, I want to change things. I want to be, I want to be a voice that's heard, to be able to impact that change and to collaborate with people. I got into this because I just want to collaborate. I want to work so that people are empowered to continue to want to make things better for themselves and for their community, and to be that we're guardians of each other. I'm here to lift you up and you lift me up. And so I think this kind of leads into my final question. I've used a lot of like social media and things, and, just kind of getting out there and talking about various issues, or having, a local politics info session where you get to learn about like what a planning commission does, or a zoning board of appeals, or, what the art commission, or whatever exists in your community, learn about how it works. And I think that using social media for our generation has been a game changer. And, we see this with movements, and, the way that young politicians are utilizing, these means as a way to galvanize that popular support. And then to even tell a story about, oh, well, that's for old people, or that's for this people, or that's for that group. But then you share that experience and like, look how it is, look how accessible, and look how you can be a part of this, or look how I'm working for you. In some ways, there can be a pushback when it comes to social media. And, I think, what do you think is the future of social media movements and utilization of social media for, the realm of politics?
Oh, I mean, that's a big one. I mean, I remember first getting started in politics and putting out the idea of during a parade, geotargeting for everybody who was there. So when they saw the float of the candidate, they would all be prompted by ads with them. And I remember how everybody looked at me like, you can't do that. Like, yeah, 2015, y'all. But we've come so far, right? And I feel like I've probably said too much about politics. And by the time I turn on Hulu over here, it's going to be like everybody who's running here in different issue areas. But, not only is it such a receptive form that's easy for people to get engaged to, but the targeting is scary. And it gives us a lot of resources to make sure that we're reaching people and, connecting with folks. And I think something that COVID has taught us too is that we can't rely on knocking doors.
Right.
You should. I'm gonna tell on all y'all who not knocking doors, but you should knock doors. But if you're not knocking doors right now, just like showing how important it is to have very targeted, specific contact with your voters. Because even when you call people on a phone, right, you don't know if you're going to get the person that you're trying to talk to. You don't know, if they are not completely distracted or anything. So there is a value to directly, having a conversation with a person. And so that has been a very difficult thing right now to do. So I say do your doors safely if you're doing them. But I think it's really important now that we have people moving in so many different areas. Ernestine, you talked about earlier how remote year is an opportunity, and I think we're going to see a lot more folks living in different areas than they work and being in areas that are completely different and transitioning there. And so we need to be smart about how we're targeting, like, are we knocking on doors that somebody doesn't live in full year or they're not registered? Is that going to be a new way for young people? Thinking of things like that, I think is going to be really important. And I think also privacy is something that comes into play, election security, and what are resources up and down, making sure that not only are our institutions that provide the service of, administrating our voting process are safe, but Facebook is safe, but Zoom is safe, but Google is safe. I mean, how much information about our campaigns do we think, that are we using in different formats for campaigns that could be easily hacked? And so that's something that we think about, our conversations, our phone calls, and all of that, and how that tempers into elections once we start putting out more information with our phone number and our resources and sharing information in different formats. So thinking about those components as well. But I think overall, social media is a unique tool. I mean, I think if we can support the different methods of how we're able to access it, for example, affordable and accessible broadband, and making sure that people have the understanding and the literacy to use the internet. I think that's a big hoop too, because we are still in a 2-generational phase where we have a lot of folks that we still need to accommodate who may have, issues using a computer, issues understanding the internet and all of that together. And so we need to be conscious of that as well. But if we can make sure that our literacy access for internet is compounded with our actual effectiveness in, accessing it, I think this could be an incredible tool that we could rely on, but overwhelmingly take over how we do our elections in the future.
Right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I mean, we talked about, everything from, the economy to, criminal justice reform to millennial workforce development. We did have quite a few folks joining us out there. And so if anybody on the web has any questions, feel free. I probably should have said that in the beginning. If you have any questions, feel free to ask Herasanna and I, and we can answer those questions. But if not, in the meantime, I am just going to thank you so much for joining and for having this discussion. And it's really important to be able to have these open discussions with folks who are in leadership positions. And I think this is why, that this is the accessibility is so important, and because it furthers the work and it empowers people, because I feel like the biggest, aspect of, being a civil servant and working in the political realm and this sphere is the fact that we need to empower people to realize that they have agency. And, then also to be able to reframe the conversations and to re-examine, just us and our missions and why we fight for what we fight for. And then I feel like this is just going to be my new mantra. It's like we are the custodians and gatekeepers and the protectors of each other's shared American experience. And we have to be able to stand up for what we all fight, what one person is fighting for, I'm fighting for. Whether it affects me or not, this is the essence of what it means to be a civil servant. So I really, really am appreciative of all of the advice you have given me. I feel like I'm running a tab here with you where I'm going to owe you like so much money based on all this free advice you've been giving me. I just feel like I've learned so much since meeting you. And I think our first interaction was last year. Oh, and, we pretty much just kind of like hit it off, and then ever since then I'm just like, hey, I got a question about this. How do you do this? Oh my gosh, what does this mean?
Experience.
But yes, thank you so much, and continue to go out there and model the way and be an amazing person, and just an inspiration.
Oh, you don't make me cry, Ernestine. Thank you. I had so much fun. I hope to do it again. I always adore and enjoy talking with you and sharing Black magic. And
next week. All right, so you guys can join us out there in cyberspace. But I did get some comments to say that like you are impressive. And oh, Charlotte says that you remind me of her. Wait, no, I remind her of you. So I'm like, that's a compliment. And yeah, that's everything. Thank you all so much out there for joining. And goodbye, Facebook. I'm gonna stop the recording.